Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into the high-stakes game of corporate accounting loopholes and the new ironclad locks built to stop them. If you've ever, stared at a company's glossy financial report and wondered, are these numbers actually telling the whole story? Well, you're absolutely in the right place. We're tearing down the facade today. We're going to examine the exact mechanisms that have historically let businesses paint a very specific and sometimes totally misleading financial picture. And more importantly, we're going to break down the strict new regulatory solutions designed to finally end this era of financial illusion.
So let's kick things off with the ultimate financial detective question. How exactly do companies use the rules to lie legally? It sounds like a total oxymoron, right? We usually just assume that if a financial statement is audited and published, it's got to represent objective truth. But as we'll see, accounting is really as much an art as it is a science. For years, massive corporations haven't even needed to break the law to hide their financial reality. They've just exploited the gray areas inside the rules themselves. They take flexibility that was meant for good faith, and they use it to subtly shift numbers, delay the bad news, and accelerate the good news.
To figure out how they pull this off, we absolutely have to start with AS1. This stands for the Disclosure of Accounting Policies. You can think of AS1 as the foundational rulebook. It's the literal text that dictates how companies are supposed to report their financial policies to the rest of the world. Now, the original intention behind AS1 was pure transparency. It was built so investors and regulators would know exactly what accounting methods a company was using. But here's the catch. Historically, this dense legal text has been absolutely riddled with loopholes. Clever management teams figured out that the very document meant to guarantee transparency could actually be weaponized to obscure the truth. They used discretion as a shield.
To make sense of all this, we're organizing these 10 dense legal loopholes into a clear forensic investigation. We'll start with choosing your reality, then move on to hiding the details, tackle the numbers game, and wrap up with closing the escape routes.
All right, let's jump right into Chapter 1, Choosing Your Reality, and see exactly how companies build a skewed foundation from the ground up.
Let's look at one of the most notorious tricks in the book, referred to in the source text as Loophole 7. It's all about the ambiguity of substance over form. Historically, companies could structure a transaction so its legal form looked completely different from its actual economic substance. Think about it like this. They could hide massive debt off the balance sheet by creating complex legal entities that, purely on paper, looked independent. The legal form was the ultimate loophole, but the new lock? This deadbolt forces them to report the true economic reality. All transactions now have to be recorded based on their actual economic substance. If you try to deviate and hide behind a mountain of legal paperwork, the new rules demand a detailed, independent audit certification to justify it. So yeah, you just can't hide behind a clever contract anymore.
And that ties directly into Loophole 1, which is all about removing unchecked management discretion. Under the old AS1 rules, management had this incredibly wide latitude to just select accounting policies based on their own judgment, which meant they could literally cherry-pick the policy that gave them the highest profit to hit their bonus targets, or maybe the lowest tax burden, and just brush it off as a judgment call. Well, the new regulatory fix completely replaces that because I said so mentality with verifiable economic justification. You literally cannot adopt or change a policy now unless it demonstrably reflects a true and fair view. Plus, you need a documented rationale that an auditor can actively verify.
This brings us to a brilliant fix for Loophole 3. See, previously, there was just a massive lack of uniformity across different entities. Company A might value its inventory one way, while Company B did it completely differently. It made it basically impossible for investors to compare them. Seriously, it was like comparing apples to bicycles. Now, those critical areas are legally standardized. Policies for things like depreciation, inventory valuation, and revenue recognition are explicitly prescribed. It completely removes that subjective reality companies used to build for themselves and forces everybody to operate on the exact same foundational grid.
Okay, moving on to Chapter 2, Hiding the Details, or what we like to call the art of concealment. Because, once you've skewed your foundation, you've got to cover your tracks.
To tackle Loophole 2, where accounting policy changes were just quietly swept under the rug, regulators brought in this brand new 4-point lock. Back in the day, a company might tweak how they calculate something, bury it in a tiny, microscopic footnote on page 84 of their annual report, and then boom, magically their profits soar. The reader would have zero idea what actually caused the jump. But now, any change mandates a strict, unavoidable disclosure. You have to explain the exact nature of the change, give the real reason for doing it, and crucially, you have to provide the quantified impact on profit assets, and liabilities. They literally have to put a hard dollar amount on exactly how their little rules change manipulated the bottom line.
When it comes to loopholes 5 and 8, the new rules really drop the hammer. Companies love to brush devastating financial details under the rug by subjectively calling them immaterial. It was basically their magic word to dodge disclosure. Well, no more. Materiality thresholds are now quantitatively defined. If an omission crosses a strict numerical line, it must be disclosed. End of story, no arguments. Furthermore, the era of cherry-picking is officially over. Companies used to selectively disclose only the accounting policies that made them look fantastic. Now there's a strict, uniform format for all significant policies. It forces the good, the bad, and the ugly straight into the spotlight.
The most crucial point really comes down to this exact legal phrasing right here. Omission of unfavorable accounting policies shall be strictly treated as concealment. That is a massive structural shift in the regulatory language. It is no longer just an oversight or a casual difference of opinion if a company just happens to leave out a policy that makes them look bad. The rules now explicitly define that behavior as active concealment. They are legally branding it as hiding the truth. This puts immense, heavy pressure on management and auditors to be radically transparent. The old defense of, "Oh, we just didn't think it was important to mention," is completely officially dead. And to make sure you can actually spot these hidden trends over time, we arrive at the fix for loophole 10. The magic number here is 3. That's the number of preceding periods, whether that's years or quarters, that financial statements must now include comparative policy impact statements for. Before this, the lack of comparative transparency meant users just couldn't assess the impact of an accounting trick across time. A company could change a rule, reap the huge benefits this year, and you'd have absolutely no idea how it skewed the historical trend. By forcing them to show the math for 3 preceding periods, regulators have guaranteed that trend analysis is actually based on reality and not just some shifting mirage of accounting changes.
Which leads us directly to a wildly fascinating tactic in Chapter 3, the numbers game, and how companies actually manage to weaponize the concept of prudence.
It is honestly so ironic that the fundamental accounting virtue of prudence became an open door for manipulation. Look, prudence is supposed to mean you don't overestimate revenues and you prepare for potential losses. You're being financially careful. But Loophole 4 shows us exactly how companies abuse this idea of subjective prudence. They would over-provision, meaning they'd claim massive expected future losses during a really highly profitable year. On the surface, they look like they were just being incredibly safe. But in reality, they were stashing away those over-provisions to create hidden financial reserves. It was a literal secret piggy bank. Then, when a bad year hit, they'd quietly release those hidden reserves back into their profits to make it look like they just had a fantastic quarter.
The solution to this whole piggy bank tactic is this incredibly clear new mandate. Provisioning under prudence shall be based on verifiable evidence. Excessive or arbitrary provisions shall be prohibited. The days of a CEO casually saying, "Hey, let's set aside $50 million just in case," are totally over. Every single provision now requires hard, measurable evidence. If you expect a loss, you have to prove exactly why and exactly how much using actual data. And if an auditor finds an arbitrary provision that was clearly just designed to smooth out future earnings, they now have the explicit legal mandate to prohibit it and adjust those numbers right back to reality.
But listen, none of these new rules or definitions matter at all if you don't have a robust alarm system in place. And that brings us to our final chapter: closing the escape routes through monitoring and penalties.
To fix the historic lack of real-time monitoring, which was Loophole 6, these rules now demand a massive technological leap. It used to be that policies were disclosed exactly once a year, and nobody was really checking if they were being consistently applied day to day. Well, this new workflow changes absolutely everything. Step 1, the policy is formally disclosed. Step 2, and this is the real game changer, mandatory automated compliance systems constantly monitor the company's live accounting entries. And Step 3, the very second a transaction deviates from that formally disclosed policy, it triggers an instant audit alert. Human oversight is now backed up by an automated real-time tripwire that literally cannot be bribed or convinced to look the other way.
And here is the ultimate hammer drop for Loophole 9. Historically, the AS1 rules had one fatal flaw: incredibly weak enforcement. You could break the rules, get a slap on the wrist, and just move on. Not anymore. Now, non-compliance attracts severe penalties, most notably the mandatory restatement of financial statements. Let me tell you, in the corporate world, there's almost nothing more humiliating, costly, and damaging to a stock price than being forced by a regulator to publicly retract your financial statements, admit they were totally wrong, and restate them. It destroys management credibility in an instant. It is the absolute ultimate deterrent.
So, as the gaps between the old loopholes and these strict new locks finally close, we are left looking at a radically transformed landscape. By demanding economic substance over legal form, standardizing the rules, implementing those automated tripwires, and threatening incredibly public restatements, regulators have systematically dismantled the old toolkit of corporate financial manipulation. But it leaves us with a really provocative question to consider. As long as human beings are incentivized by massive financial bonuses to hit very specific targets, will these automated locks truly end the era of the financial illusion? Or will companies just invent entirely new, invisible loopholes we haven't even thought of yet? It's definitely something to keep in mind the next time you're reading through an earnings report.